All right, so picking up where we left off, now what I want to do is go ahead and create some text in here. So I'm going to create text by using my text tool over here in the tool panel. And I've chosen 20th century MT bold. You can choose whatever you want, but make sure that it's something that feels somewhat majestic. And you're probably going to want to use something that's kind of bold because we're going to be extruding this. So, and I know that I'm not going to start it at 12 points. I know that I want it to be pretty big, so I might as well go ahead and make it kind of large. And let's go ahead and do something in the ballpark of, I don't know, like maybe 135 points. And I can go ahead and start typing right here. And I'm going to make sure that the color is black. I'm not going to have mine centered. I'm going to end up justifying it. So I'll show you how that's going to work in just a second. So I'll type majestic. And then I'll come down here and I'll type productions. And now productions is a lot, it's like way too big. I want it to be in line with the word majestic. So I'm going to make that a much smaller point size to kind of justify it. And let's do that somewhere in the ballpark of maybe, I don't know, like see if 90 looks right. And it looks like it doesn't. It's a little too small still. So let's just bump that up a little bit. Maybe 95. See how that looks. And it does look like 95 works. Okay, so that looks like it's about accurate. So what I'm going to do now is I can take this and I can move it, and you'll notice that it starts to give me some kind of guide suggestions, like for where the middle point is. And I don't think that I like it sitting right on top of the crown, because it might look okay right there, but once we give it some shadows, 3D shadows, I think it needs to be a little bit more separated. But I do want to keep it in line horizontally. And then if we look at this crown, we can make sure that it is still centered. You have to make sure, of course, there we go. You have to make sure, of course, that you have the correct layers selected as you're moving things around. And now if we wanted to move both of those together, we can hold Shift down in the layer panel and select both, and then we can move them, you know, so that they're a little bit more centered. And so I think I'm pretty happy with that. And now what I can do is I want to, you know, I need to draw some kind of box around it that would be containing border. And so I'm going to go over here to my vector tools. I'm going to choose the rectangle tool, and I'm just going to draw a vector so that it's like, I don't know, something like this. And again, it's going to give you some suggestions there with my little pink lines. And then you see what it wants to do is it fills it. And you'll also notice over here in the layers that it creates a rectangle layer, which is fine. So I'm going to choose to give it a stroke that is black, okay? And then I'm going to choose to give it a transparent fill. And then the stroke needs to be a much higher point size or pixel size, however you have it set up. And I think that I'm probably going to be kind of happy somewhere in here, because don't forget, this is going to have a texture applied to it. All right, so I'm pretty happy with the way that this stamp is going to look. It's going to be not really a stamp like it's going to be depressed. It's actually going to be extruded so that it's coming out. And what I want to do now, you see that it's a rectangle over here. It's a vector. So what I need to do is rasterize it again. So if I right click on it, it'll let me rasterize the layer, and that turns those into pixels instead of a vector drawing line. And so now what I've got are these three layers that are, you know, basically all together. And I'm noticing too something else that may or may not matter, but on this crown, as I look at this in the detail, there are these little wings down at the very bottom that I think aren't going to really matter if I keep those, and it help probably simplify the path. So I'm going to take the eraser, and while I have the crown selected, I'm going to just click on that so that I get rid of those little extra wings, and it's going to simplify that path quite a bit for me. And then if you also wanted, you could come in and fill some of this in. We'll see if we need to. If it tells us the path is too complex, then we might need to actually fix that. But anyway, I'm going to go ahead and save that, and I'm going to zoom back out. And if you hold down Option, you know, you can get the zoom out. Okay, and so I'm going to go into the layers over here, select all three of these, and oh, and the other part is that I need to rasterize my text. I could either make a selection, fill it, and then, you know, that'll be raster pixels, and then I've got my original text. if I decide later that I want to manipulate it. Or the other thing that you can do is you can right click this and you can just go ahead down here and say rasterize type. And that's easy enough to reproduce. I know that I was using 20th century MT bold, and I remember approximately the sizes. If you needed to write that down, that's fine. Otherwise, you could duplicate the layer by dragging it down to the little page icon, and then you'll still have your original type layer that you can turn on and off. So now I've got these three rasterized things. I'm going to select all of them, and then if I right click, I can go ahead and tell them to merge. Down here I'll say merge layers, and I'm going to rename this. I'll just call it logo. All right, I'm going to save what I've got so far. So now these are the files, or excuse me, these are the layers that I have, and you know, I think I'm pretty happy with the way this is going to look, and I could go ahead and extrude this now. But before I do that, I'm also interested in making some textures. So let's go ahead and make some textures. I'm going to choose this dark rusted steel, and actually what I mean by making textures in this case is not making materials, but instead I want to make this into a 3D postcard that can be used as a background and moved around in a three-dimensional space. So I'll select dark rusted steel, and I'm going to go up here to 3D, and I'm going to choose where it says new mesh from layer. And so I'm going to create it as a postcard mesh. All right, and you'll see what it does is it puts it now newly in a three-dimensional space where you can see the perspective ground plane down here. It's got vanishing point somewhere back here. All right, and you see underneath in the layers panel, you see that it has textures, diffuse, dark rusted steel, and then it has this little three-dimensional looking object over here in the layers panel. The other thing that I want you to see that has happened is that now if I select dark rusted steel here in the regular layers panel, and I go back over to 3D, this little panel that says 3D, you'll see that now I have this mesh, excuse me, I have this object that's called dark rusted steel mesh, all right, and then this is the mesh face for it. And you can also see that it's got a material applied to it. Even though I don't have that as a saved material, it is applying the material to this flat, it's called a flat postcard, but this is what this material is right here, okay? So let's go ahead and go back now over here to layers, and the next thing that I want to do is I do want to actually, after I extrude this, you know, this logo so that it's like a three-dimensional thing sticking out, I do want to actually apply this painted rusty texture to the face of it as if it had been painted on the face, and you know, maybe even the whole thing that it's extruded had been painted and is now sort of rusting through. So I need to also create a postcard out of this as well. So if I go back up here to 3D, mesh, postcard, then it allows me to also turn that into one as well. And then if I have this selected in the layers panel and I go back to 3D, you see it's got, this is the scene, by the way. I can also look at my meshes like this, and then this is my light sourcing, which I won't go over just yet. But let's go back to the scene, and it shows me that I have this painted rusty wall mesh selected. And then when I select it here in the 3D panel, you'll see that it actually starts to give me some 3D manipulation tools on screen, which I'm not going to do anything with just yet. But then instead of creating or selecting the actual entire wall mesh object, if I actually just select the mesh that is applied to it, you see that this is where it shows me the material texture. And I want to actually create this as a material that I can apply to something else. So if I click on this drop down, you'll see that it has all these meshes that are just, you know, come with Photoshop as the standard material library. And, you know, some of them are okay, but most of them I think are not that great. So it's really kind of nice when you find a good texture, you make your own texture. I'm going to click this gear icon. I'm going to say new material. And because I have my mesh selected over here, painted rusty wall, it's going to ask me what do I want to name it, and it's going to automatically populate this field with painted rusty wall, since that's what I have selected. I'll say OK, and now you'll see that painted rusty wall is available. All right, so now I'll be able to use that whenever I go and create my extrusion. So let's go back into layers. I'm going to collapse this so it doesn't take up a lot of room. And I'm going to select logo. And now I'm going to extrude that logo. So if we go up here into 3D, I can say new 3D extrusion from selected layer. And you see that it automatically creates this extrusion, and it doesn't have any material textures applied to it, which is, that's normal. It's just sort of this flat, color. Looks like paper or something. So first thing you'll notice is that it shows you, when you do that, it puts you in the 3D panel, and then because I had that layer named logo, what it does is it shows me the logo here in the 3D panel, and it has this little sort of extruded looking star next to it to show you that it is an extrusion. And while I have the main parent logo that has the drop down selected, you'll see this is where I'm able to grab and change my extrusion depth. This is a really deep extrusion, and I don't really want it to go 600 pixels deep. I think what I want to do is maybe change it to about 100 pixels, and I think I'll be a lot happier with that. Okay, the other thing that you could play around with if you really wanted is you could play around with the different shape presets. So right now this is the standard one that's selected. You could also choose to put a bevel or something on it if you wanted. All right, I'm not going to do that though. I'm just going to leave it alone, and I'm just going to jump back in my history, in fact, to undo that shape preset. I'm just going to leave it at standard. Okay, so now that we've done that, I actually want to be able to map a texture to its meshes. To do that, I can't just select the main top level right here. I have to go down here and select the meshes, and you can tell that they're meshes because of this little mesh icon that's next to them. Okay, so I'm going to select all 5 faces by holding down Shift, and then if I come up here, now I can select my painted rusty wall. Okay, and then it applies that for me, which is pretty cool. And so it's, it starts to look like something that had been painted and, sat around for long enough and started to rust. Okay, so far so good.